Now, some of y'all remember Dan Brown. He wrote a book called The Lost Symbol. The Lost Symbol was actually a Masonic Bible that was bound beneath a magic Apollonian square at the testes of the obelisk. And they believe that by putting the Bible under the Apollo square, that it's being bound beneath a 666 grid, and therefore they're constraining the power of God. So that the power of God delivered through the Bible cannot be exercised in the city of DC.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. Before we begin this interview with my friends Justen and Wes Faull, just a quick word from this interview's sponsor, the Fighter Flare flashlight. During a pandemic that goes global, it's not a bad idea to stock up on essentials, and if the lights go out, you'll want to have the Fighter Flare flashlight. The 6-in-1 Fighter Flare flashlight comes with a 3000 mAh solar-powered recharging battery, 800 lumen LED, high-low beam light, emergency strobe light, compass, wire and rope cutter, emergency glass-breaking hammer, and a high-powered military-grade magnet. The Fighter Flare flashlight is the perfect addition to your household and cars, but limited supplies last, so act now to get 20% off the new 2020 model before they sell out. Take advantage now. Use promo code SGT20 to save 20%. Visit fighterflare.com. I'll leave the link below. And welcome back, friends. Thank you so very much for clicking play. Hey, so much good news to share today. You know, the president is giving the FCC now the power to rein in these big social media tech fascists. And I can't think of a better piece of news to share with y'all. Oh wait, I can. It's this. Our president today has announced that the U.S. government will now designate Antifa as a terrorist organization. And I keep tweeting to President Trump, arrest Soros. He's the one who funds Antifa. And today we're going to share more news about the deep state. Many of you don't realize how deep the deep state goes and how far back it goes in the history of our nation and in the history of the world. Back on the line, Justen Faull. Our last interview was titled The Ultimate Deception. That was posted back in November of 2019. And he and his brother Wes are here to discuss their new film, Belly of the Beast. Justen, first, welcome. How are you?
Man, Sean, it is great to be here again with you, man. I'm doing well. Man, praise God. It's awesome to be here. I'm excited to visit with you again, man. Thank you.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you back. And Wes, we've not met, but I saw you in the film. I did watch it this morning. How are you?
Doing good, man. It's a blessing to be here. I love what you do, man. So thanks for having us on.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. And we really appreciate your guys' work. Let me ask first, why did you guys decide to make this film? It's such a huge undertaking. It's hard for me as the interviewer here to even know where to begin. I have some ideas. I have some concepts based on when I visited Washington, D.C. with my family a few times. I'll share a story about that in a second. But why did you guys decide to make Belly of the Beast?
It gets back to this idea that some claims were brought to us that, and we've been researching this stuff. We've been researching DC. We've been researching the shadow government. Funny, we've been talking about the shadow government long before 2016 when the world began talking about the deep state. I'm okay calling it the deep state, but in reality, this is the shadow government that we were exposing back in 2003. This is the shadow government that was behind 9/11. This is the shadow government that was behind the Kennedy assassination. This is the shadow government that's now behind the COVID-19. This is the deep state. These are the people in this world that are trying to take away our freedoms. These are the people who are utilizing satanic rituals that are affecting our lives. So when I hear that there are some specific places in DC where rituals have been enacted regularly by high-ranking politicians, public satanic rituals, I wanted to go out there and validate whether or not some of these claims were true, because some of these claims were new to us. And so, let me ask a question. And I think this, if I ask this question now, I think that this will allow people to think about where we're headed, and it kind of answers the question, of why we made this film. How many people are aware that there is a secret location, a ritual chamber in Washington, D.C., specifically in the nation's Capitol building, a ritual chamber that was built for the resurrection of Osiris, of what the Bible would call the Antichrist? How many people have heard of this? Fact is, very few. This is one of those nuggets that a very validated researcher brought to us, who we worked with on the film, and we wanted to go to DC to get to the bottom of this. And I just want to say, we can't cover everything in the film in this interview. I could never do justice in an interview to this film. This is a must-see film, Belly of the Beast, director's cut. Hopefully you could put a link in the description where people can go and watch this or buy this. There is an original film that we released through another company. That's not the one you want. You want the director's cut. We've had time to go through and make it exactly what it needs to be without being rushed. And so we are releasing the director's cut. And I got to tell you, Sean, getting out into DC and finding out that people were expecting you to get there to sabotage your filming, that tells you that you're on the right track.
Yeah, I did see the audio interference in that portion of the film, the interview with Tom Horn. And, I think one of the great places to start, and I want to hear more about that secret chamber. So you tell us what you found out about that when the time is right. But I want to start with the founding of our nation, the Freemason hand in the founding of our nation. And I want to talk about the layout of Washington, D.C. That may be an interesting place to start. You note in the film that the D.C. layout was designed by LaFont. Do you guys remember when Barack Obama screwed up his inauguration swearing in and he had to be sworn in a second time?
Yes.
Yep.
I pulled up that image today because that took place, I believe, in the Blue Room of the White House with Chief Justice Roberts. And as memory served me, I wonder if the painting behind him was of LaFont. It wasn't. I found that today. The painting in front of which Obama was sworn in the second time, because he screwed up the first time, is a painting of Henry Latrobe, the designer and architect of the Capitol, and no doubt a Freemason.
Wow. That's huge, man.
People don't understand that the secrets of Freemasonry, they don't understand what it's all about. Now, they say, yes, it's a secret society. Yes, they have secrets. We know they do a lot of good deeds for people, raising money for good causes. But when you get up to a certain degree, it's all based on a big pyramid. You work your way up. Every degree you go up with a new ritual. And this film is not just about Freemasonry. Matter of fact, this film is so far beyond Freemasonry. But Freemasonry is a big part of what's going on, because it's the resurrecting of those ancient rites going back to the worship of Isis, the worship of Osiris. If you go back over to the Pantheon in Greek and Roman culture, you're dealing with Apollo, Apollyon. This is the god that the ancient prophecies, we'll just specifically say the Sibylline prophecies, talk about. This god is going to be resurrected in the last days. His spirit is going to come up out of the underworld where he is currently through a ritual, and he's going to take his place in a man. Okay, this is something that we have to understand. This is held onto by the Freemasons in the highest levels. We know this for a fact. We've had this validated by high-level Masons. They've written about this in their literature, this idea of the seed of Osiris coming up from the underworld, taking its place in a man, and leading the world. They believe that America is going to take its place as a beacon of light in this final coming, occult, pagan, polytheistic, get this, a polytheistic age of enlightenment. I know that sounds crazy with all the New Age stuff going on right now. This is going all the way back to the Sibylline prophecies you're going to hear about in ancient Rome. This is also depicted in the Great Seal. We've talked about this in other interviews. Henry Wallace, vice president to FDR, he wrote about this in his biography. He talked about the seal, the Great Seal that we have on all of our, we've got it all over DC, all over documents. The Great Seal literally is the Sibylline prophecy. The Great Seal depicts this time where Osiris is going to rise up. So that literally lines up with what the Bible talks about as the Antichrist that is going to suffer a deadly wound. And we really break this down in the film. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I know you want to say something.
Well, no, you're making some great points. And Freemasonry definitely is a part of the film. But like Justin was mentioning, it's a lot bigger than that. And one of the things I wanted to mention before we get to the founding of the nation is just to state that the Western Hemisphere, that it was well known thousands of years ago in Egypt. They talked about it. Plutarch, the biographer, the Greek biographer, talked about ancient voyages making it to to this great continent in the Western Hemisphere, and even making it to the Great Lakes area. So there were things taking place on this on this great continent in the Western Hemisphere, long before it became the United States of America.
Even before the Indians were here.
Right.
We have, look, the mayor of New York, DeWitt Clinton. He's a historic mayor of New York. You can go look up DeWitt Clinton. He took all of this information to the New York Historic Society, and he explained that they have ancient fortifications that they have excavated on American soil, showing that there was an advanced civilization inhabiting this great continent long before the Indians were here. Now, Sean, that goes against everything we've been taught, that there was an advanced civilization on this continent far exceeding the Native Americans and here long before them. And here's where it gets crazy. You have this evidence that they took to the New York Historic Society. They presented this evidence, and they even showed how the Native Americans received knowledge from whatever this ancient civilization was, because the Native Americans had their own secret societies, namely the Iroquois. We show a lot of documents of the Indians with Masonic jewelry and Masonic symbols. Well, they were not Freemasons by name. What they were doing was they were having that religion that was passed on down from the forefathers of this advanced civilization.
It was already here before they got here.
Exactly. And so let's quickly talk about the name America, where it came from. I think it's a good place to drop in. America comes from the word Amaru, however you want to say that. Amaru is the name of the serpent god in Peru. Now, we're dealing with North America and South America. You have this one god, the serpent god, who is worshipped all throughout South and what we call South America and North America, Mexico. He was called different things in different places, but it was a serpent god. And so in Peru, he was Amaru. In Quiché, he was called Gucamats. In Mexico, many people are familiar with Quetzalcoatl. It's the same god, the same entity, the serpent god. Now, the Bible talks about the serpent being Satan, Lucifer. What we're presenting here is that we have historic evidence that this serpent god was we're not wrestling with flesh and blood. We are wrestling with principalities. We're dealing with these higher entities, these demonic entities, these fallen angels, which we really break this down in the film, that they were here leading this great deception long before America was set up. And this goes right back along. I mean, this was the land of serpent worship, Sean, historically documented, the land of serpent worship, the Western Hemisphere. Now, let me say one more thing about this before we move on. This goes right back in line with Sir Francis Bacon writing the book called The New Atlantis. The New Atlantis basically prophesied that this great continent was going to rise up in the last days, and it was going to be the continent to lead the world. To lead the world. Okay, that was Sir Francis Bacon. Some people believe he was the same author as William Shakespeare. That's another topic for another day. But you also have other ancient writings pointing towards this great Western continent. This is going back to the writings of Plato. Plato. They knew about this before Plato. And they were documenting that the Egyptians came to this great land, set up shop. There's evidence of even Egyptian temples in the Grand Canyon. We don't even have time to talk about that. Talk about black operations and government. They don't want you to know this. It's all about setting up this religious system and this enlightenment portal, a portal of enlightenment that's going to beam its light to the entire world in the last days. And listen, as good as that might sound to some people, it lines up with the kingdom of the beast, which the Bible talks about. It lines right up with everything that we've been warned about in Scripture. And furthermore, the final world kingdom under the rule of Antichrist. I mean, that's what it is. Everything's been strategically planned for this continent. So if I tell you that the deep state literally was following all of these predictions and prophecies that are thousands of years old as they created America as an oligarchy. We have we interviewed a guy from the Pentagon, a Pentagon analyst who is all over the news. Many of your viewers are probably familiar with him, very conservative. And he comes into the film and he breaks down that America, we've been deceived even how the founding fathers created the government originally. They actually created it as an oligarchy. When our founding documents were getting signed, they had the windows locked. This is coming straight out of the Pentagon. I mean, we have been sold a complete fabricated story of the origins of America.
But we also see evidence of this being fulfilled through globalization. So the deep state's ultimate end goal is a one world system, which parallels with Bible prophecy, and it also parallels with these esoteric prophecies that they're trying to self-fulfill and bringing in this final world kingdom.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's a tough nut to crack when you consider the history that we've been fed as kids growing up, and many adults don't know about the Bohemian Grove, which you guys talk about a bit in this film, and other secret societies. I want to do a screen share here and show you guys this. When we were in Washington, D.C. a few years ago, we visited the George Washington Masonic National Memorial. Yes. Now you guys can see the compass and square prominently displayed out front there. And George Washington, I believe, was a great man. We're told, history tells us, that he was such a great man that the people wanted to make him king. And he said, no, that defeats the whole purpose of what we've done here. And when the King of England heard that George Washington had refused to be king, he said, who on earth would refuse to be king? He was very impressed with that, we're told. So here's the thing. The George Washington Masonic National Memorial shocked me when I went inside and saw all of the historical memorabilia. What really bumped me were the items for sale in the gift shop. The upside down, you know when you take a 5-pointed star and you turn it upside down and it's actually Baphomet? This was Baphomet to the nth degree. But what shocked me inside the George Washington Masonic National Memorial was the symbology in so many dark symbols, and I would say satanic symbols, in that building preserved to this day. Had you guys gotten a chance to get in there?
They would not allow us in there with our camera. Matter of fact, we had some things take place in D.C. As we were prepping for the trip. They were already we already got blacklisted. That's another story. I don't want to waste time telling that story. But we got once the people at the Herodome, the Masonic Temple in D.C., which is a mecca for Masons, by the way. Once they caught wind of who we were and who we were working with, they contacted us back through our location manager, and they told us we were not welcome even on the front steps. And then as soon as that happened, Sean, all of our other location permits that we had applied for, they just quit contacting us. They wouldn't return our calls or our emails. We completely got blacklisted from the higher-ups in D.C. They were ready for us when we got there because of the guy that we were working with, Tom Horn, who has connections with high-up Masons, who has been in secret chambers of the Masonic Temple in D.C. He's got secret knowledge. He even had secret coins given to him by Masons, and then he began to expose these things publicly, and he got blacklisted. So we already were at a disadvantage when we got there. Little did we know that there were going to be plainclothes agents, if you will, that were going to be following us around D.C. on a daily basis and then trying to hijack and funnel our audio out. It's unbelievable what we dealt with over there.
There's definitely a lot of conspiracies surrounding our trip, even leading up to it. But to go back to what you said about the Baphomet, I was just thinking about this. It kind of popped into my head. There's a statue of George Washington in the Smithsonian, and I don't know if we got to see it or not.
They keep moving it around.
Yeah, it's a very infamous statue, and he's in that position of the Baphomet. He has the as above, so below, going on with his hands. And it's basically like it's modeled after the Baphomet picture that everybody, knows, with them sitting there. So there's definitely some parallels between their train of thought, their ideology.
It lines up with a tarot card called the Magician. It lines up with the Hermetic Order. It lines up with statues that people have seen of Zeus. But let's be clear here. These things were made after the fact. Washington did not say, hey, make a statue of me looking like Zeus. He didn't say that. And let me be clear about George Washington, okay? And some people say that he renounced the lodge. Well, he did. He renounced the lodge, the British lodge. But he reconfirmed his life over into the American lodge. Like, this is all on record. Matter of fact, his funeral, he had a private funeral separate from the public one where the Freemasons cast sprigs of acacia and evergreen, which is an Egyptian practice of welcoming the soul over into the underworld where Osiris is king.
Right.
Now, Washington believed that what he was doing was good. He was not a Christian. He was actually a deist.
His pastor called him a deist.
Yeah, he went to church regularly, a Christian church, but he never accepted Christ because he saw things differently than Christians see things. He never accepted Christ. He was a deist. He believed in the great architect of the universe, which the Freemasons tell you when you get up to between the 28th and 30th degree, you find out that the great architect is in fact Lucifer. Mm-hmm. That is a fact that is written about in some of their high books, their higher up holy books, such as Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, which Albert Pike is celebrated in DC they've even got his body hidden in a crypt inside of the Herodome, the great temple in DC. Now, let's break this part down real quick. DC people say, well, how can you prove that DC was built as a pagan temple complex? How can you prove this? Well, we went to the Library of Congress. And in the Library of Congress, we can pull up articles and documents that most Americans have never seen before because they've never taken the time to research this. But we show right from the Library of Congress that Thomas Jefferson shepherded a plan, and it's called the Most Approved Plan. You can look this up at the Library of Congress. And he shepherded a plan to build D.C. as a temple complex dedicated to all the old pagan gods. This is on record at the Library of Congress. We show this. He shepherded this plan, specifically paying attention to the dome, the Capitol Dome and the Rotunda. And they admit that the Capitol Dome, the Capitol building, this great building that we all have, some of us have actually been inside and visited, this thing was actually built as a temple. It's called the Temple of Liberty. Now, backtrack to the Library of Congress. We're looking at slides. We're looking at old film scans. The Statue of Liberty that we have today, Sean, it's only been called the Statue of Liberty for, probably about 100 years. Before that, it was called the Goddess of Liberty. And we show this in the film. We show all of the old monographs. We show all of the old film scans from the Library of Congress. This was always called the Goddess of Liberty, who was literally shining the light of America upon the entire world. This goes right back to the old writings of the ancient Romans. I mean, you can't get more specific than this. So when you find out that the Goddess of Liberty is what they've called her, and then you find out that they built the Capitol building itself with the rotunda and the dome. They built that as a temple to the Goddess Liberty. And you see her at the top of the temple as well. But here's the crazy part. You've got the Capitol building on one side of the mall, and then on the other side of the mall, you have the Washington Monument, which most people know is 555 feet above ground and 111 feet in the ground, giving you a totality of 666 feet from base to tip.
Right.
Now, why is that important? In the ancient myth of Osiris and Isis, this is what people have to grasp onto. We're not going to get into the whole myth here. We break it down in the film. But this idea is that there were 72 demonic conspirators, fallen angels, who worked to kill Osiris, and they cut him up into 14 pieces. Okay, well, Isis comes in. She gets them to put all the pieces back together, and they can only find 13. He's missing his phallic. He's missing his male sex organ. Okay, apparently that was out in the Nile River, and they couldn't find the 14th piece. But they stitch all 13 pieces together, and they put them together in a more perfect union. 13 in a more perfect union. That's starting to ring a little familiar with the foundation of the colonies. The framework of this country goes all the way back to mysticism to bring about this resurrection of Osiris. So in order to bring about the resurrection of Osiris, you have to recreate this ritual chamber that they had in ancient Egypt. And so recreating that is setting up an obelisk and setting up a dome. It's a generator, according to Egyptian mythology. And the Freemasons claim to have the rituals in the original language kept secret over thousands of years in the Herodome, which is their official temple in D.C. Every U.S. president, whether they are conscious of it or not, as they're standing there in the inauguration, and you can back this up with we document these things, guys. This is well known in Freemasonic literature. While the president of the United States is getting inaugurated right around the corner at the Herodome, the Masonic Lodge of D.C., they are performing what is called the Raising of Osiris ritual. Why do you think they're putting him right there? They strategically have placed the inauguration moment between the dome and the obelisk, because this is what they did in ancient Egypt. Every time there was a new pharaoh, they did this Raising of Osiris ritual. He would literally be standing between the dome and the obelisk, and they believed the seed of Osiris would come up from the underworld, possess them. Basically, the president is a man until the ritual, and then the spirit of Osiris is guiding him through his presidency. That's what the Freemasons believe. They've documented this. This is all in line with the prophecies of ancient Egypt.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, please.
You're saying during the inauguration of every president, at the same time, there's a ritual being performed by who? High-level Masons?
The highest level Freemasons,
at
yes.
the Herodome. At
the Herodome, which is the Mecca temple of Freemasonry for the world.
Yeah, it's literally just right out of the pages of Egyptian history. So you had the pharaoh, and he was being inaugurated in, and he's it was called the Festival of Opet, and Opet. And so he's being he's being floated down the Nile, and everybody's basically, worshiping him and accepting him. But while that's taking place, they're performing this ritual to be able to literally transmogrifize is what they believe, that he's going to be a demigod at that point in time with the inhabitation of Osiris within him. And so this being immaculately kept, it was passed down from Isis to the Egyptian magicians. I said it right. That's a tongue twister.
Egyptian magicians.
So it's passed on to them, and they practiced it with the pharaohs, and it's also been passed down through the mystery schools until today. And the Freemasons still keep this and still practice this with the inauguration, like you were mentioning, of every U.S. president.
In the original language, too. That's what's crazy, is they have maintained the original ancient hidden language of this ritual they claim in their writings. And so here's the other thing I want to add to that. The Pharaoh's court, okay, if people are not familiar, just think about in the Old Testament when Moses and Aaron were, remember the whole let my people go scenario? Moses and Aaron were doing, God was doing miracles through their hands. Mm-hmm. And Pharaoh was able to have his magicians. They were tapping into some real magic. They were able to mimic almost all of the miracles God did. Mm-hmm. That's right out of the Bible. Right. We know that these guys were tapping into a real supernatural force. Absolutely, there's no doubt. The Freemasons of today claim to have all of that power, to claim to have all of that original language and ritual. And we break this down very much in detail in the film. We're really, I hate having to rush through this information, but I want people to get as much of it as they can. Not everyone's going to be able to go watch the film. I get that. So I want you to understand that this is an ancient ritual that is being carried out on American soil. It could not be done without the Washington Monument where it is, the Capitol Dome where it is, and the Hera Dome where it is. Now, it doesn't end there. The people who designed all of this in D.C., they needed, in their minds, they needed to create a safeguard. So they actually initiated what's called an Apollonian square based on Apollo, which we know is Osiris. They've created a magic square, and we show this in the film. It's actually up in the temple room in the Masonic Lodge in D.C., but they've got another one over there right at the base in the testes of the Washington Monument. They call it the testes of the monument, where they have got a magic square in the ground. Now, some of y'all remember Dan Brown. He wrote a book called The Lost Symbol. Mm-hmm. The Lost Symbol was actually a Masonic Bible that was bound beneath a magic Apollonian square at the testes of the obelisk. And they believe that by putting the Bible under the Apollo square, that it's being bound beneath a 666 grid, and therefore they're constraining the power of God. Mm-hmm. So that the power of God delivered through the Bible cannot be exercised in the city of D.C. Now, you say, well, how can you prove that? Well, I can prove it two ways. First of all, they've mimicked this at the lodge in D.C. We show this. We got our own video footage inside the lodge. We were able to get in, by the way. That's another story. We were finally able to get in. That's a crazy story, praise God. They have an altar set up in the Masonic temple with the holy books, including the Bible. The reason they do this is they put it right underneath the magic square, and they put it with the other holy books so that the quote-unquote Christian Masons don't realize that there's an attack on the Bible. That's a whole nother discussion about Christian Masons. I don't want to get into that and offend anyone right now. But they have bound the Bible in the lodge under the magic square. They bound the Lost Symbol Bible at the base of the obelisk in the Washington Mall. And then a few years back, they had to do some excavations where they had to release to the public that they have a 12-foot miniature obelisk right there with the Apollonian square and the Bible bound in Washington, D.C. They had to pull out the obelisk to do some work. And people were like, what is this little 12-foot obelisk? We didn't know about this. Why would you bury a 12-foot obelisk? Well, that's a whole another topic we break down in the film. There's a secret obelisk that's part of another ritual, and they believe that it has to do with setting up the perfect New World Order government. The number 12 represents the perfect government in the New World Order. That's another aspect of the deep state setting up a global regime.
Well, and I want to talk about the New World Order and the Great Seal and the bankers, the international banking families that have ensnared us and trapped us with their money machines. And that's all part of this in my view. But let me just real quickly ask you about Freemasonry in general. There's a popular pundit who I interviewed, I think, once a long time ago on YouTube. His name is Gregory Mannarino, and he acknowledges that he's a Freemason. And the reason I bring that up is I just want to ask you guys, when people hear this topic of Freemasonry, it doesn't necessarily mean all Freemasons are bad and in on this. Am I correct in that? Because let me just extrapolate a little further. when we take a look at Vatican whistleblowers who say at the highest echelons of the Vatican, there's satanic worship and ceremonies going on, that doesn't mean all Catholics are bad. So getting back to this idea of Freemasonry, at what levels of Freemasonry do people become in on this plot that you're describing?
And it's all compartmentalized. It's a great question. I do agree with your assessment of that not all Freemasons are bad. With the idea that it's all compartmentalized, there's a lot of things at the lower levels when people enter into that they have no idea. It's kind of like they go through a ritual and it's like, okay, this is what this means at level 1. But then you get to level 2 and 3 and they're like, yeah, let me let you in on this. It's actually, this is what it's meant to be. So it's compartmentalized. And initially, I mean, we have friends that we have many friends that have been involved in Freemasonry. Some at the lower levels, which they call porch masons, levels 1 through 3, I believe it is. They're kind of on the outskirts. They join it for fraternity purposes, for being able to hang out and have fellowship with people. So there's different tendencies. It's not until you get into the higher levels, or if you take yourself outside of it and start reading the books, you start reading the doctrines of Albert Pike and Mackey and
Manly P.
Hall. Exactly. You read those books, and they're breaking down their doctrine that actually Lucifer is this light being that they worship. So it takes a while for an individual to get from 1 up to 33, or in York, right? I think it's to like 13 or something like that. But there's a process, and it's kind of like a 2-step or 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of deal.
All right. Well, then
that helps.
It does help, I think, and that's what I suspected your answer might be, because
can I add something else to that real quick?
Yeah.
Just for the benefit of our friends who are Freemasons, because look, I mean, I'll admit it. Like, we have some dear friends that are low-level Freemasons.
Right.
I mean, we have discussions with them, and they clearly have no idea what we're talking about. Right. Depending on what state you're in, and depending on what city you're in, and what the regulations of that lodge are, how bad they need money, sometimes they will allow you to pay them X amount of dollars per degree, and you can go through what's called a crash course weekend, and you can get the basics, and you can get basically given honorary degrees. They don't call it honorary, but it's like that. You pay for your degree, you get a crash course in the weekend. And so what you end up with is some of these Masons that have bought their 32nd degree ritual, and it doesn't look the same as somebody who's actually earned their 32nd degree ritual. So there are people who are higher up who have bought their way up in the Masons. This is a fact, and true Masons hate this. They'll tell you that they despise how this is going in America. It's like a fast food version. So there are even high up Masons that aren't aware of some of this information because they've bought their degree. So I want to make that clear as well, because there are people who have never been privy to this information who are in the lodge.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that. And let's just talk about the big picture then. In your view, is America sort of the linchpin to this new world order, one world government? I mean, to those of us that understand even recent history, we know that George Bush Sr. was the head of the CIA before becoming president. I believe that man and the CIA specifically played a role in the assassination of JFK. There are terrible people, deep state people, that have reached the highest echelons of power in our own nation. In your view, is the United States of America an important part of this new world order?
Yes. I love America as much as anyone else does. I'm as patriotic as anybody else is. I've grown up in this nation. I've thanked God.
Blessed to live here. There's no other nation we'd rather live in.
The freedoms that we've been given here versus what other nations have. There's no other place I'd rather live. Even right now in the coronavirus garbage, I would rather be right here in America than anywhere else. Let me get that out there. This is not an anti-American approach to history. What this is trying to better understand where America is headed based on the dreams of the founders, which, by the way, if you don't believe that the founders had this vision as well, George Bush in 2005, George W. Bush gave a speech in 2005 after 9/11, obviously, where he explains that the founders of this great nation, and we showed this in the film, the founders of this great nation, that they were acting on an ancient hope, which is going back to the Sibylline prophecies of Osiris, by the way. He says they acted on an ancient hope, and he goes, and that hope is explained in the Novus Ordo Seclorum, the new order of the ages. He literally connected the new order of the ages. He said that out of his own mouth. Go look at your dollar bill. Go look at the pyramid made out of 72 stones. with the eye of Osiris on it. That literally says Novus Ordo Seclorum, which is Latin for the new order of the ages. Bush said that from the podium to America after 9/11. Now, we break 9/11 down in the film, not as a Muslim attack, but as a satanic Aleister Crowley ritual that was going to open up by using blood. We document this. 9/11 was actually carried out as a ritual to open up the new aeon. Okay, the new aeon. Now, the new aeon is the words in the language that Crowley used, but the Bush family used the term, this new order of the ages. The new order, the new aeon. You can pick whatever word you want. They're practicers of Aleister Crowley magic. And furthermore, this film actually crosses back over into some of the higher entities information about the Babylon working ritual, where we believe Hillary Clinton was birthed during that ritual, with Aleister Crowley's magic being utilized in the desert of California. Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard. We talked about this with you last time. I don't want to waste time going back on it, but we break this down fully in the film that we believe that Hillary Clinton is the moon child that was birthed in that satanic sex ritual.
Yeah, and it's so stunning because there are rumors, and you and I may have discussed this in the past too, that Angela Merkel is the product of something quite similar. And then we see Macron there in France. He's a former Rothschild banker. He worked for the Rothschilds. So when we consider Washington, D.C. and its role, its design, and its potential role in a future New World Order, one world government, must we not also consider the Vatican and the City of London? All three set up the same way as their own sovereign entities. Most people don't understand that. The City of London, controlled, I think, by the Rothschilds, the Vatican, and Washington, D.C. Is this part of a three-pronged stool that will lead us into this New World Order?
I believe personally that Rome is a major player behind the scenes of America. I should say that. The Vatican is very much engaged with the deep state. No doubt about that whatsoever. But we have to also look at the fact that Bible prophecy does talk about a revived Roman Empire. It's going to be the final kingdom. And when we compare some of the items that we break down later in the film, it shows how America is the revived Roman Empire, but it's also the resurrection of the Babylonian mystery schools. Now, all of these things are prevalent in all three locations that you mentioned. Yes, they're also prevalent in the modern state of Israel. Okay, the modern state of Israel was founded in 1948 by the Rothschilds. People can look this up. It's got tons of Masonic and Illuminati symbolism throughout the entire nation and their state buildings. So, you got
Israel. The Supreme Court is a stunner, designed by the Rothschilds at tremendous cost, so much so that the final tally, the price on that thing, is secret. But the Rothschilds paid for it.
Man. You're nailing it, dude. Exactly. And so all of these things, it all goes back to Babylonian mystery schools. Now, this is fascinating. Before I go there, I need to finish a statement that I got off track in the beginning. America, the name America, is put together of two words. It's a compound of two words. You got Amaru Ka. Amaru, as we stated earlier, is the plumed serpent god that was worshipped in Peru. So Amaru in Peru, he was Gucamatz in Quiche. He was called Quetzalcoatl in Mexico. And here we now have deemed this country Amaru Ka, which translates specifically, literally, to the land of the plumed serpent. Now, if America, from its origin point, was always considered the land of the plumed serpent, they mixed around some of the words later on to give us America, the modern version of that. If it's the land of the serpent, and we know that the serpent was also behind what was taking place in Babylon, okay, Babel, the Tower of Babel, that was like the first attempt of a new world order. Nimrod was trying to be the original initiator of that. It wasn't God's time yet. And so what happened was God destroyed that biblically. He destroyed the Tower of Babel. He confounded their languages. That's why we have all these languages in the world today. And I also believe that it was at the Tower of Babel when the continents drifted apart. Okay, I think that was all part of God's plan to confound mankind from building the one world order before its time, before prophecies were to be fulfilled. So all the religions they were practicing in Babylon, they were worshiping the old gods. Many of them were worshiping the 72 fallen angels, by the way, that we're going to talk about here in a minute, that are depicted in the Capitol. So all of those schools of thought, including Freemasonry, it goes back to what's called the Babylonian mystery schools. That is now, which was all about bringing together a one world under this religious system of universalism. All of that is now present in America. The Babylonian mystery schools, it's all here. The Freemasonry, they're doing the same rituals that were taking place back in Babylon, the same rituals that made their way to Egypt. All those things are taking place here in America today. And so when we get this idea of Babylon, we are in the final Babylon. We present with scripture. And look, for people who are not Christians, you don't have to be a Christian for this information to be 110% pertinent in your life. If you're a patriot, okay, if you're a patriot that cares about your freedoms, if you care about the state of this country, you need to see this film. This might possibly be the most important documentary film you're ever going to see in your life. Let me say that again. This could be the most important documentary film you will ever see in your life. Look, I love every project I've worked on, Sean, but this film is one of those films that literally has to be seen by patriots, by Christians, by non-Christians. I mean, people out of the country everybody needs to see this because it's showing the globalist agenda from a spiritual perspective and showing that it's revitalizing and resurrecting the old gods of Babylon, of Egypt. Now, why would I bring all this stuff up if it didn't have a major purpose? And that major purpose was the rituals. We're probably going to have to come back and talk more with you about this in the future, but there is a secret ritual chamber. And this is funny that you brought up Washington earlier and how Washington did not want to be a king. Fascinating, because you're exactly right. Washington, even though he was a deist, even though he was a Freemason, even though he believed in a different God than I believe in, Washington he was very much humble compared to somebody that wanted to be a king. They built a crypt for Washington's body to lie in, but it really wasn't for Washington. They knew he wasn't going to lay in it because he did not want to be called the Osiris. That was a title he didn't feel comfortable taking. Okay? They built a crypt, a secret crypt, which it's a ritual chamber. We got footage of this ritual chamber in the Capitol building, Sean. We showed this in the film, never before seen. A secret lockdown ritual chamber. There's still locks. Like, it's not even open to the public. Okay, if you could even get down to this chamber, you can't get past the iron gate with the locks on it, but you can see through them where there's pentagrams. But the average person can't even go down there. You have to have a connection. We utilized a connection that had there was a connection, a girl that was connected with a congressman that was able to get us footage down. Okay, this is crazy stuff. This is stuff that people die over. Okay, they don't want this information out there because when you find out that the Capitol building is a power generator, a charged object built specifically for drawing down powers from the 72 fallen angels or the cosmocrators, you get there, you find out that this hidden chamber is all the way down at the bottom of the Capitol building. It's like a basement chamber. And then you come right up and you've got the 13 statues inside of the statutory hall. And those 13 statues are representative of the 13 pieces of Osiris that we talked about that got put back together. That's all part. You have to have certain numbers lined up for rituals in the chambers. Then you go up further and you have the apotheosis of George Washington in the rotunda. Now, if you look up inside the Capitol dome, at the underbelly, you're going to see George Washington in heaven with all of the gods, not all of the gods, but a lot of the gods and goddesses from the ancient world. Okay, there's nothing Christian up there. There's nothing about Jesus or crosses or apostles or Michael, and nothing. All it is George Washington being deified with the other gods, including Vulcan. Why is Vulcan important? Vulcan is the god that the Masons believe that gives them the seething powers and energies of Lucifer. This is all in their literature. We break all this down in the film. Washington is up there, and he is surrounded by 72 pentagrams, which you mentioned the pentagram earlier when you were in the Washington Masonic Hall. When you went to that Masonic Hall in the gift shop, you saw those pentagrams. Well, they've got 72 of them circling George Washington in the dome of Isis. I remind you that the Capitol dome is the dome of Isis. They declared this. 72 pentagrams, and they represent the 72 fallen angels or the 72 cosmocrators. It gets into Kabbalah. It gets into strange Jewish mysticism, but it also ties back to Egypt. We're dealing with the same entities that have appeared to man with different names. And in DC, you have a melting pot of all these different views coming together, which goes right back to the motto of America, which is E pluribus unum, out of many, one. That is what makes up America, Sean. America is everything, everyone coming together as one. That is the definition of a new world order, my friend. Now, look, this is not to sound anti-American. I love it here, but knowledge is power. how are we going to understand the current situation of the deep state if we don't understand the history of the deep state and what their plans are?
Well, I want to add something to that and kind of go back to one of your initial questions on Rome and the relationship to DC, and just looking at that. We're also not saying that there wasn't a move of God taking place. God's always had a remnant, and I mean, you had the Puritans. There's different elements that God was still actively engaging, and the spread of the gospel was taking place. We're not saying that didn't happen. Our focus here is, like you were mentioning, to look at the other side, the hidden history. And so when you mention Rome, a lot of people want to, in Bible prophecy, want to jump to Rome as being the revived Roman Empire, the mystery Babylon, and there's some good arguments for that. But what most people don't realize is that DC was actually built on Rome, Maryland. So before the District of Columbia was set up, it was on the land of Rome, Maryland, and I can't remember the guy's name. He was a Catholic, but regardless,
his name was Pope.
Yeah, exactly. He had
the guy that owned the land. His name was Pope, ironically.
Right. So he sells it to them. It was also built on 7 hills, which is another interesting thing.
Capitol Hill being one of them.
That's why people point to Rome. So it was set up for a purpose. That's the thing. And as you were mentioning, Justin, going back to Babel, it's like, this is an old idea. This one world system is an old idea, and it wasn't time back then, and we know how it ended. So we fast forward to today. That plan is still in play. It's been passed down, like we were mentioning, from the mystery schools, from generation to generation. And now we're at a point where globalization is taking place. We're the last, there's really no other place Sorry. There's no other place to explore or for this to come to fruition. And so with the idea that there is the deep state that set up this government from the get-go, and even coming to fruition in the architecture and in the statues, we have this idea that we've been taught that it's a Christian nation. And even Billy Graham said that it was not a Christian nation, never has been. There's Christians that live here. But if you go there and you've been there yourself, you don't see crosses, you don't see statues to
Bible characters,
to the disciples or the apostles or you name it. I mean,
it's gods and goddesses.
It literally feels like you're walking through Rome. I mean, there are these, and it came to fruition through what Jefferson wanted. He wanted to He wanted to pay homage to all the gods and goddesses, all the pagan gods, and to reconstruct these pagan temples in DC. And then we find out that it gets even deeper than that, because it's set up for a purpose to perform rituals on a massive scale. So it's a really diabolical plan, but the end game is globalization. The end game is a one world system. And we're seeing that through this deep state that's still in operation. They're bringing those things to fruition, and they're using America as the one to be able to spread it through democracy.
Well, they're sure trying to. Let me do one screen share here before we part ways. It's interesting, Justin, every time we have a conversation, it comes back to the Lord Jesus Christ, right? These people hate him so much. Not this man. This is David Wood. And he explains in this video that YouTube gave him a strike for the crime of reporting about persecution of Christians around the world. They called it hate speech. These people hate Christianity. The big social media companies, the mainstream media, so many people, Hollywood, are aligned against Jesus Christ. One must wonder, even those of you who are agnostic or atheist out there, consider, why do they hate Jesus Christ so much? And this is probably a can of worms here, guys, but I'd be remiss to ask your thoughts on President Trump. The deep state, the mainstream media, Hollywood, they're all aligned against President Trump. What is your view on President Trump and the deep state that's aligned against him?
I'll be honest with you. I really don't know if I can even answer that question, because my research takes me to looking at the root of problems. And so, generally, we're working so much behind the scenes to put out new content, new films. I personally don't get too caught up in who the president is. And I don't say that as an insult or an attack on anyone. But with what we focus on, with all the research that we're doing constantly, and I don't have cable TV either. So like, I really haven't kept up with all of what everybody's saying about Trump and the deep state. I'm familiar with, the claim that Trump is trying to fight the deep state and they're trying to fight him. But at the end of the day, we're so engaged in what we're doing that I don't really, we don't keep up so much with, the latest and the greatest of what's coming out of Washington. We pretty much focus on the project at hand.
Yeah, I would kind of add to that it's when you're dealing with the deep state and you're dealing with the shadow government and the issue of globalization, it's a lot bigger than Trump. He's one person. And so, yeah, it's really hard to kind of nail it down. I guess we kind of look at the evidence, the way that the world is headed, and that is evidence that's showing that the deep state is active and they're moving towards a one world system.
And Trump has told us about the deep state in 2016. It's very possible that it was Trump that made the deep state a household name in 2016, because I had never really heard of that before he was talking about it. But I'll say this, presidents, generally speaking, they can only do so much. As Wes said, they're one person. And so they've got a team of people they're working with, or an administration. I tend to believe that with the Trump administration, it's a mixed bag. There's people in his administration that I think are absolute dirt.
Sure.
And then there's people in his administration I think are probably trying to do the best. And I mean, goodness, just look at Fauci. Fauci was up there sharing a stage with Trump. Yet, I called it from the beginning. I was like, this little half pint, this little midget here. I was like, I called it. I was like, he is part of the problem. And I didn't know who he was or anything, but like my spirit, I knew. And now it's come out that, he is part of the deep state. I pray for President Trump on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine being in that position with so many factions in DC. I can't imagine what that's like. But I do pray for President Trump. Again, I'm not trying to steer away from your question. I can't really add anything to that, that would be that's just not my expertise, the Trump versus deep state or whatever. But I'll say this. Back when Ronald Reagan went against the grain,
prime example.
Great example here. Reagan went against the grain. He was not operating the way they wanted him to, and they fired a warning shot at him. They didn't miss.
Yeah, get back in line.
It was a warning shot specifically placed to just hurt him, not to kill him. And it was not an assassination attempt. That's what the media wanted you to believe. The media is run by the deep state. They wanted you to think there was an assassination attempt. In reality, they said, hey, get in line, do what we tell you, or the next shot is going to be placed where you won't recover. So I believe that when presidents, Trump, if Trump really is fighting the deep state right now, he's got a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
And in that situation, honestly, I'm not trying to sound negative, but I mean, we're talking about plans, Sean, that have been put in place thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
These are plans. And here's the deal. The Bible says that there will be an antichrist. The Bible says there will be a revived Roman Empire. The Bible says, and Jesus said, don't let these things trouble you. Because if you're a Christian, you can hold on to the hope we have in Jesus Christ and the promises that he's made to us. And Jesus said these things must happen, the wars and rumors of wars, all the negative things that are going to come upon the face of the earth during the tribulation period. Jesus said, don't let this trouble you. It must happen. And so I'm here to tell you that, hopefully, there's people in the Trump administration that can push some of this off, but that doesn't change the importance of needing to know what they've already laid out in plans thousands of years ago. And then with America popping up as this last days nation, we're a baby nation. We forget that. We forget that we are a baby nation. And when we put that in perspective, it's like, man, nations have risen and fallen. And yet here we are now in this nation that seems to be fulfilling the very prophecies of Scripture.
Yeah. If anybody has any questions, and we've kind of scratched the surface, but go read Revelation chapter 18. It gives a point-by-point description of what this mystery Babylon looks like and what that system is. And we're seeing it. It's very similar to what's taking place on the world scene today. Yeah. I did want to mention something because we started off, the film is about the deep state, but I wanted to give a breakdown real short and brief.
So much we can't even hit on.
But I want to make sure that people get this because it's deeper than what's being presented on TV and different people. We interviewed Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis. Just was mentioning him from the Pentagon, senior Pentagon analyst, and he breaks down the deep state in his book, The Deeper State. But he breaks down 3 different levels of the deep state. And so on the first level, you have the legislative branch and bureaucracy, and that basically taking the decisions to the world on the world scene. Underneath that, you have a second level which influences the first level. And so you have secret societies, you have lobbyists, you have the rich elites who are pouring money into people's campaigns, influencing that first level. But underneath that, you have the unseen realm. You have the spirit realm that they're tapping into in order to get power and direction. And so that's why we ended up going to kind of break down what Bohemian Grove is, because it's bigger than the Freemasons. It's bigger than the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Rosicrucians, the you name it. It's all pushing the same agenda, but through different names. And so you have the third level, the spirit realm, demonic, satanic, whatever you want to call it, Luciferian, which is influencing the second level through the secret societies and the rich elites and their lifestyles. And then that is influencing the first level, which makes its way to Washington. So you have these rituals and this agenda that eventually is going to make its way into policy.
And I want to add one thing to that, if I might. When we consider how these rituals are enacted, Bohemian Grove is one example of an annual ritual where the elite deep state members from all over the world come together and they do a cremation of care ritual. And by the way, we presented full, never before seen documented photos from Bohemian Grove showing actual humans being sacrificed. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say that on YouTube. Wes backdoored into the server at Berkeley. And
how about for safety's say that they could be effigies?
Whatever. I'm just making a point that when you look at the images are extremely graphic. We even had people tell us that it's too graphic for them. We got images that have never before been broadcast anywhere in the public of actual rituals. Not the big ritual. We're talking about actual, what they call preliminary rituals, preparatory rituals, setting up the week leading to the big ritual at the Owl, which is not Moloch, by the way. The Owl is tied back to Semiramis, the great goddess, the witchcraft goddess. We break things down in the film that we are not even able to scratch the surface on in this interview. But I want you to know that everything that we presented in the film is so well documented, and it's done in a way that you can be educated, but that you can also take this information and educate others. Most of the Christian community, the truthers, the patriot movement, regardless of religious views, we all know that the deep state is a Luciferian entity, if you will, right? We all know that. But what we don't all know is how deep it goes, how it was part of the foundation of this nation, how it was fulfilling multiple ancient prophecies of multiple religions, and how we now have this place that we've located in D.C. beneath the Capitol Dome, which is a ritual chamber where they will lie this body of the Antichrist in the state, and they will call upon Osiris to come up from the underworld and possess this man. And they believe that America is going to take its rightful place as a beacon of light, which, again, I have to say this again, who controls the trends of the world? America does. Whatever happens in the Western world generally trickles over into the rest of the world. We're literally, I don't want to sound prideful, but we're the greatest nation on earth in worldly terms.
Sure.
Okay, we've got the best military. We've got the best, I would even argue that we've got some of the best technology. Just because we don't know what the government has underground doesn't mean we don't have the best technology. China tells you what they have. Our government is smarter than that. I think our government is keeping a lot of that from the mainstream public for safety reasons. Regardless, we live in the best nation on earth. I don't mean any disrespect to say that. I'm not prideful about it. We need to know these things. We need to know what the founders had in mind. And furthermore, just to back up the claim that the deep state goes back to the foundation of America, we were an oligarchy until Andrew Jackson. It wasn't until Andrew Jackson that we even had a voice to have a party system. So if it wouldn't have been for Andrew Jackson or that mindset, then it would still be an oligarchy today, which they say it still is an oligarchy. The deep state claims that it still is an oligarchy, and their people claim that in interviews. We document this as well. But Andrew Jackson came along and he says, we're going to bring in the party system. And remember, was it Thomas Jefferson? I forget who it was. One of the founding fathers warned of a party system. He actually warned not to submit to the party system.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was.
But regardless, they did not want their oligarchy challenged. Again, this is history. This is history that you can uncover if you go to Library of Congress. We document everything in this film so that people's questions get answered.
And the name of the film, guys, is Belly of the Beast Director's Cut. Where's the best place for people to find it?
fourthwatchfilms.com. If you go to fourthwatchfilms.com, all spelled out, matter of fact, that's what our screen name is on Zoom. But if you go to fourthwatchfilms.com, Belly of the Beast is going to be there. You can get the DVD, which is a special edition release. It's a limited supply on these DVDs because it's the second that we did an initial release with another company. We got rights to release the director's cut. Make sure that you get the director's cut. That's the one you want. It's the final finished product. You can get the DVD. You can stream it immediately. And I'm telling you guys, this film is going to shake you up. This film is going to really get people excited to continue the fight, to stand up. Knowledge is power, ladies and gentlemen. The more we know about our enemy, the better we can be equipped to stand. That's what I want people to take from this. Mm-hmm. We don't just get up here and make outrageous claims. We take you to DC. We show you on location what's going on. We give you things that you will never see anywhere else. Things that we have excavated at the Library of Congress that will rock your ever-loving world.
Well, guys, I really want to thank you for your time today, and I'd ask everybody to go and check out Belly of the Beast Director's Cut, because you know what? We really are fast approaching the end times. We're living in the last days. If YouTube is going to tell YouTubers that reporting about the persecution and murder of Christians around the world, if just merely reporting that fact and citing the numbers is hate speech, boy, we've really entered a scary time. And I, for one, am very glad that President Trump is getting the FCC involved in the regulation of these big social media tyrants. It was Peter Dale Scott who coined the phrase deep state, and I think you're right, Justin. It was President Trump that made it a household term. The
Right.
Deep state is aligned against we the people, this president, the Constitution, and the deep state is working on behalf of this new world order. That's what they want, a one-world government, and in a one-world government, Agenda 21 scenario, you guys don't have a right to property or freedom. Our guests have been filmmakers Wes and Justen Faull. The film, Belly of the Beast Director's Cut. Thanks, gents. I really appreciate your time.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure's all mine. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We very much appreciate you. A shout out to our patrons who are keeping us in the fight for truth and real news. And for real news, guys, please visit us directly at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda 24/7. Oh, and I'll leave a link to the film below, guys. God bless. Bye-bye.
Kill all pigs. A lot of these really extremist anti-police sentiment is coming from the Antifa extremists.